Little Rascals were the most famous children in America. Millions watched them laugh, fight, and play on screen like nothing could ever go wrong. But behind those cameras, something else was happening. One was shot dead over $50. Another was found alone in a hotel room with no one to claim the body. One died at 16 from a scooter his parents had just given him. And the kid everyone loved most spent 20 years addicted to heroin after being introduced to it in jail. The Little Rascals made the whole world smile. What happened to them after the cameras stopped will make you sick. George Robert Phillips McFarland, known to the world as Spanky, was born on October 2, 1928, in Dallas, Texas, and his life in pictures began almost by accident. In 1931, his aunt mailed his photo to Hal Roach Studios after seeing a trade magazine ad asking for cute kids, and that small decision changed everything. He went on to appear in 95 Our Gang shorts over the next 13 years, which was longer than any other cast member. His first contract gave him $75 a week for 5 years, an enormous amount during the Depression, and by the time MGM signed him again in 1938, he was earning $1,500 a week. For a child, it was a dream life. Then, one day, it stopped. At 14, Spanky looked at his parents and said, plain and simple, "I'm tired of it." He walked away from acting, but acting never really let go of him. Hollywood had already locked him into one image, and no matter how much time passed, the industry could not see anything else. So the boy who had once been one of the most famous children in America found himself working at a soft drink plant, a hamburger stand, a popsicle factory, and a gas station. He later opened a barbecue restaurant in Oklahoma City and even made his own steak sauce. Stability did not come until 1966, when he became a sales executive at Philco Ford and later Magic Chef. He stayed in corporate sales for 29 years, far longer than he had ever stayed in films. Looking back, he summed it up with the kind of honesty only age can bring. He said he would not take $1 million for the experience, and he would not take a penny to do it again. On June 30th, 1993, he suffered a fatal heart attack in Grapevine, Texas, at the age of 64. There was one last cruel twist. His wife had been secretly arranging a star for him on the Hollywood Walk of Fame as a surprise. But he died before he ever knew. The star was unveiled after his death on February 1st, 1994. If Spanky's story carries a quiet sadness, Carl Dean Switzer's story hits like a thunderclap. Born on August 7, 1927, in Paris, Illinois, Carl became Alfalfa in the most unlikely way. In 1934, he and his brother Harold were at the Our Gang Cafe, the studio commissary that was open to the public, when they broke into an impromptu song and dance routine. Hal Roach saw them and signed both boys on the spot. Carl began at $50 a week and eventually made $275 at his peak. Between 1935 and 1940, he appeared in 61 shorts, and by 1937, he had become so popular that he even passed Spanky as the most beloved rascal. But childhood fame rarely promises adulthood security, and for Carl, it certainly did not. He left the series at 12 and picked up scattered film work after that, but only in small bits and pieces. He had an uncredited role as Donna Reed's date in It's a Wonderful Life in 1946, and another uncredited part as a slave in The Ten Commandments in 1956. Yet those roles never led anywhere solid. Most of the time he scraped by. He worked as a bartender at Wolf's Den in Studio City, a hunting guide, and a dog breeder whose clients included Jimmy Stewart and Roy Rogers. Trouble seemed to follow him too easily. In December 1958, he was arrested for illegally cutting down 15 pine trees in Sequoia National Forest so he could sell them as Christmas trees. He received a year of probation and a $225 fine. Before that, he had married heiress Diantha Collingwood, in 1954 after just 3 months of dating. They had a son, Justin Lance, in 1956 and divorced the very next year. Then, in January 1958, someone shot him in the arm. The gunman was never identified, and the mystery was never solved. Still, none of that would become the darkest chapter. That came on the evening of January 21st, 1959. Switzer and his friend, Jack Piot, a 37-year-old studio photographer, drove to 10400 Columbus Avenue in Mission Hills, California, where Moses Bud Stilts, a 38-year-old welder, lived. The whole confrontation came down to $50. Switzer had borrowed Stilts' hunting dog and then lost it. Trying to fix the mess, he placed a newspaper ad offering a $35 reward. And when the dog was found, he also bought the finder about $15 worth of drinks. That added up to $50, and Switzer believed Stilts owed him the money. Both Switzer and Piot had been drinking when they arrived. To get inside, Switzer jokingly announced himself as Western Union for Bud Stilts. Once the door opened, the joking stopped. He demanded the money, tempers rose, and the argument spun out of control. At some point, someone smashed a glass-domed clock over Stilts' head, swelling one of his eyes shut. Stilts retreated to his bedroom and came back holding a .38 caliber revolver. During the struggle, the gun went off once and nearly hit his 14-year-old stepson, Tom Corrigan. Then came the shot that ended everything. According to Stilts, Switzer pulled a knife and said, "I'm going to kill you." So Stilts fired again. The bullet hit Switzer in the groin and severed an artery. His reported last words were heartbreaking in their simplicity. "What did you shoot me for?" A closed penknife was later found under his body. He bled to death before reaching the hospital. He was only 31. 4 days later, a coroner's jury ruled it justifiable homicide. Stilts cried on the stand and said, "Alfie charged me with a jackknife. I was forced to shoot." For years, that stood as the accepted version. Then, in January 2001, Tom Corrigan spoke publicly and told a very different story. More than 40 years had passed, but he said the shooting looked much more like murder than self-defense. According to Corrigan, Switzer and Piot were actually trying to leave when Stilts fired the fatal shot. He also said an LAPD detective had interviewed him at the time, but he was never called to testify. Former Our Gang cast members had long doubted Carl would ever pull a knife on anyone. And when the so-called hunting knife turned out to be only a small penknife, those doubts grew even stronger. In another bitter twist, Switzer died on the same day as Cecil B. DeMille, so the news barely made the papers. It was a cold final irony, especially since his last film credit had been in DeMille's The 10 Commandments. He was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and his tombstone reads, "Beloved Father, Son, and Brother." Yet the strangest detail of all may have come later. Every Christmas, right up until Stilts died in 1983, an anonymous card arrived at his home, signed only with one word, Alfie. Then there was Billy Thomas, the boy the world knew as Buckwheat. He was born on March 12, 1931, in Los Angeles, and appeared in about 92 Our Gang shorts between 1934 and 1944. That made him the only cast member to appear in all 52 of the MGM-produced entries. He started at $40 a week, which was modest compared with some of the others, but his family handled his earnings differently. They invested 10% of everything he made in United States savings bonds, a small decision that showed rare caution in a world where child stars were often treated as paychecks. After the series ended, Thomas made another unusual choice. He refused every offer to return to acting. He did not chase old fame. He built a quiet life instead, working for more than 20 years as a film lab technician at Technicolor. In between, He served in the U.S. Army from 1954 to 1956. For a long time, he stayed away from the spotlight. But in 1980, something happened that reminded him what he had once meant to people. On July 31st, at the second annual Sons of the Desert Convention at the Los Angeles Hilton, he received a standing ovation. It came without warning, and it moved him to tears. Then, only 10 weeks later, on October 10, 1980, he was found dead of a heart attack in his Los Angeles home. He was 49 years old. Even after death, the confusion of old fame followed him. A decade later, ABC's 2020 aired a segment claiming Buckwheat had been found alive and working as a grocery bagger in Tempe, Arizona. The man was an imposter named Bill English, who had been pretending to be Buckwheat for 30 years. Spanky McFarland personally warned ABC before the broadcast that the real Buckwheat had died back in 1980. They ignored him and aired it anyway. A week later, 2020 had to apologize on air, and one of its producers was fired. Darla Jean Hood's life seemed to move in a different direction for a while, and that is what makes the way it ended feel even harder to take. She was born on November 8, 1931, in Leedy, Oklahoma, and joined the series in 1935 at just 3 years old, after a casting director noticed her in New York City. She appeared in more than 50 shorts, and when her time as a child star was over, she actually managed what so few of them did. She built a real second career. Darla became a nightclub singer with a remarkable 3-octave range and performed at places like the Sahara Hotel, the Copacabana, and the Coconut Grove. She also became a successful voice-over artist. Audiences heard her as the Chicken of the Sea Mermaid, in Campbell's Soup commercials, and in dubbing work for films like The Towering Inferno and Airport. In 1979, she took on one last role, voicing Spanky and Porky's mother in the Little Rascals Christmas special. It would be her final performance. Only weeks later, she entered Canoga Park Hospital for what should have been a routine appendectomy. During the procedure, she received a blood transfusion contaminated with hepatitis. From there, everything unraveled fast. She died of acute heart failure on June 13, 1979, at just 47. The reaction among her old castmates was immediate and full of grief. Buckwheat said, "I hate to hear it. She was an awfully nice person." Later, Spanky would say that Buckwheat's own death the following year came from a broken heart over Darla Hood. Billy Laughlin's story feels even more cruel because it ended so early. He was born on July 5, 1932, in San Gabriel, California, and became famous as Froggy, the raspy-voiced little boy whose strange voice sounded too odd to be real. But it was real. That rough voice was entirely his own. It had not been dubbed in by anyone. His start in the series also came through chance. His mother had given him a Popeye ventriloquist puppet, and Billy became very good at doing a Popeye impression. An MGM talent scout heard him perform at an acting school and hired him immediately. From 1940 to 1944, he appeared in 29 shorts, including Dancing Romeo, which turned out to be the final Our Gang short ever made. When the series ended, Billy did something simple and wise. He told his parents he wanted a normal life and went back to high school. It should have been the beginning of something ordinary and peaceful. Instead, on August 31, 1948, he was riding as a passenger on a Cushman motor scooter, driven by his friend John Wilbrand. They were delivering newspapers on Valley Boulevard near La Puente, California, when Wilbrand suddenly made a U-turn into oncoming traffic. A truck driven by 25-year-old Paul Otto Baumann slammed into them. Billy was thrown 40 feet down the center of the highway. He was rushed to Covina Hospital, but died 6 hours later. He was only 16 years old, the youngest former Our Gang regular ever to die. The detail that hurts most is almost unbearable in its plainness. His parents had given him that scooter just 2 weeks earlier. Norman "Chubby" Chaney's tragedy took a slower path, but it was no less devastating. He was born on October 18, 1914, in Cambridge, Maryland, although his parents shaved 4 years off his age so he could meet the show's requirements. In 1929, he beat around 2,000 other children in a nationwide contest to join the series. Dorothy DeBorba later remembered him as full of mischief and said he was like a miniature W.C. Fields. But after his contract ended in 1931, he returned to Baltimore and began suffering from a glandular disorder that changed his body in frightening ways. He never grew taller than 4 feet 7 inches, yet his weight climbed past 300 pounds. In 1935, treatment at Johns Hopkins Hospital caused the opposite problem. His weight dropped from over 300 pounds to less than 140. The loss came too fast, and his body could not handle it. On May 29, 1936, Chaney died of myocarditis, weighing only 110 pounds. He was just 21 years old. He became the first regular Our Gang alumnus to die, and also the only one who did not live long enough to see the series end. Even then, the hardship did not stop. His family could not afford a headstone, so Norman Chaney lay in an unmarked grave at Baltimore Cemetery for 76 years. Only in November 2012 did fans finally raise $4,500 to place proper markers for him and for his mother, who had died in 1940. And then there was Mickey Daniels, one of the very first children audiences ever saw in the series. Born Richard Michael Daniels Jr. on October 11, 1914, in Rock Springs, Wyoming, he was part of the original 10 children in the 1922 premiere. His freckled face and hoarse whinny laugh made him one of the standout stars of the silent era. After leaving in 1926, he found a few small screen roles in films like It Happened One Night and The Great Ziegfeld, but his life slowly drifted away from Hollywood. He moved into construction engineering and worked at Pearl Harbor and later in Africa. In late 1966, an Associated Press reporter tracked him down in Tasmania, where he was supervising materials for a Bechtel iron ore mine. Then he disappeared again. After that, people simply lost track of him. Fame had faded, work had changed, and his life narrowed more and more until he became a taxi driver near San Diego and drank heavily. On August 20, 1970, Mickey Daniels was found dead in a transient hotel room in San Diego. Cirrhosis of the liver had killed him at 55. No obituaries appeared because no one came to claim the body. Authorities assumed he was just another homeless man. For 21 years, researchers did not even know what had happened to him. And even after the truth came out, one final silence remained. His grave at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale stood without a marker for decades until fans eventually raised money to give him a headstone. Matthew "Stymie" Beard was born on January 1, 1925, in Los Angeles, and from the very beginning, life asked a lot from him. He was the eldest boy in a family of 14 children, so even as a kid, there was already weight on his shoulders. Then, in 1930, he joined Our Gang, stepping in after Farina, and quickly became unforgettable. His derby hat became his trademark, and that hat had its own little piece of Hollywood magic because it was a gift from Stan Laurel. On screen, Stymie had charm, style, and perfect comic timing. Off-screen, he was not just a child actor. He was a breadwinner. His paycheck helped support his whole family. For a while, that made him seem lucky. He was famous, people knew his face, and he had the kind of spark that made audiences smile right away. But childhood fame did not protect him from what came next. When he was 18, he was arrested and jailed, and while he was locked up, he was introduced to heroin. That moment changed the course of his life. What started there turned into a 20-year addiction that followed him for years and pulled him deeper and deeper into trouble. In time, he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for the sale and possession of heroin, though he ended up serving 6. By 1966, he was exhausted enough to try something different. He checked into Synanon, a California rehabilitation program, thinking he would stay only a few weeks. Instead, he stayed 7 years. That alone says something about how hard the fight really was. And somehow, after all of that, he found his way back in front of the camera. In the 1970s, he made a modest comeback with appearances on Sanford and Son and Good Times. It was not the kind of grand return that erases the past, but it was still a return. It meant he was still there, still trying, still working. Then came the end, and it was as lonely as anything in his life. In January 1981, he suffered a stroke in a motel room. He lay unconscious for 2 days before anyone found him. Soon after, he died of pneumonia on January 8, 1981, at just 56 years old. Red Fox later said, "It's a shame that Stymie and so many people like him could be in show business all their lives and be basically unknown. He never made any money to speak of in the Our Gang comedies, even though people are enjoying them 50 years later." That is what makes his story hit so hard. People kept watching him. People kept remembering him. But the success everyone saw never really became security for the man who lived it. If Stymie's life showed how fast childhood fame could slip away, Jackie Cooper's life showed something different. He may have been the biggest success story to come out of the series, but the road there was harsh in a way that never left him. Jackie Cooper was born on September 15, 1922 in Los Angeles, and he appeared in 15 Our Gang shorts between 1929 and 1931. He was gifted, natural, and impossible to ignore. That talent soon carried him beyond the series. Paramount paid Hal Roach $25,000 for his services in Skippy. Jackie himself got only his usual $50 a week. Even so, Skippy changed everything. At just 9 years old, he became the youngest person ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor. It should have been a fairy tale moment, but the truth behind it was much darker. During the filming of Skippy, his own uncle, director Norman Taurog, needed Jackie to cry for an important scene. When the boy could not do it on command, Taurog threatened to have a security guard shoot his dog. Then a production assistant fired a gun loaded with blanks behind the set. Jackie later wrote in his 1981 autobiography, "Please don't shoot my dog. I could visualize my dog, bloody from that one awful shot. I began sobbing, so hysterically that it was almost too much for the scene." The scene worked. The tears were real. And Taurog went on to win the Oscar for Best Director. Jackie somehow kept going. More than that, he built an enormous adult career. He starred opposite Wallace Beery in The Champ. He served as a Navy captain during World War II. Later, he won 2 Emmy Awards for directing episodes of MASH and The White Shadow. Then, for a whole new generation, he became Perry White, the editor of the Daily Planet. In the 4 Christopher Reeve Superman films released from 1978 to 1987, he made the rare jump from child star to lasting professional success. But he never forgot what being a child actor had cost him. He was strongly against it. "It's no way for a kid to grow up," he said. None of his 4 children became performers. He died on May 3, 2011, at the age of 88, and he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His life became proof that success was possible, but also proof that survival and success were not the same thing. Then there was Scotty Beckett, and his story may be the bleakest of all, because it started with so much promise. He joined the series in 1934 and played Spanky's best friend in around 15 shorts. As a child, he had easy charm. He looked comfortable on screen. He felt like one of those kids who might grow up and do even bigger things. And for a moment, it seemed like he would. He appeared in films such as The Jolson Story and King's Row, and it looked as if his career might keep rising. Instead, everything began to unravel. His life turned into one long chain of trouble. There were drunk driving arrests, concealed weapons charges, bad checks, and a car crash that left him crippled. Then there were 2 suicide attempts. Then, in 1957, came an arrest at the Mexican border for smuggling 250 tablets of speed. By that point, the shape of his life had changed completely. The gifted child actor was gone, and in his place was a man moving from one crisis to the next. On May 10, 1968, Scotty Beckett was found dead in a Hollywood nursing home. He was only 38 years old. Pills were beside him, and so was a suicide note. Film historian Leonard Maltin wrote, "It was a particularly sad end for someone who, as a child, had shown so much easy charm and talent." That line stays with you because it captures the terrible gap between the bright beginning and the lonely end. And hanging over all of these lives was Hal Roach, the man who created the world that made them famous. He lived long enough to watch almost all of it unfold. Roach was born on January 14, 1892, in Elmira, New York, and before Hollywood ever knew his name, he had already lived several lives. He had been a drifter, a gold prospector, a mule skinner, and even a newspaper deliverer to Samuel Clemens. Then, in 1912, he arrived in Hollywood as an extra making $5 a day. From there, he built a studio empire. He produced Harold Lloyd. He helped turn Laurel and Hardy into legends. And with Our Gang, he created something that looked loose and funny on the surface, but was so alive that it lasted for generations. Still, even that empire shifted and cracked. In 1938, Roach sold the Our Gang production unit to MGM for only $25,000. The drop in quality came fast. Under MGM, the shorts lost the wild little spark that had made them special. They became preachy, too polished, and stripped of the anarchic humor Roach had understood so well. The series dragged on until 1944, and then it ended. That should have been the end of the story, but it was not. In 1949, MGM sold the 1927 to 1938 shorts back to Roach, though they kept the Our Gang trademark. That forced distributors to rename the series The Little Rascals, which is how millions came to know it on television. Then another twist followed. In 1963, Hal Roach Studios went bankrupt under the management of his son. The television rights were bought for $250,000 by syndication agent Charles King, who then founded King World Productions, the company that would later distribute Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and The Oprah Winfrey Show. So even in decline, the afterlife of Our Gang helped build something huge. Roach himself lived long enough to become a living piece of Hollywood history. In 1984, at the age of 92, he received an honorary Academy Award. When he turned 100, he told reporters, "I started smoking at the age of 11 and quit 2 years ago because of a cough. I eat anything I want, whenever I want." It sounded funny, almost careless, but by then he had seen nearly everyone and everything from his era disappear. He died of pneumonia on November 1792, just short of his 101st birthday. In one of the strangest and saddest turns of all, he outlived many of the children who had once filled his films with life. Even Pete the Pup, one of the most beloved faces in the whole series, had a story touched by loss. The original dog was Pal the Wonder Dog, a UKC-registered American Pit Bull Terrier. He had a natural ring that went 3/4 of the way around his right eye, and the rest was painted in by his trainer. That look made him instantly recognizable. It became part of the image people remembered forever. And in a quiet little detail that says a lot about the business, Pal earned $125 a week, which was more than most of the human cast members. Then, in 1930, Pal was poisoned. It was most likely done by someone with a grudge against his owner and trainer, Harry Lucene. Whoever did it was never identified. After Pal died, his son, Lucene's Peter, took over the role. His ring was painted around the left eye by the famous Hollywood makeup artist Max Factor, purposely placed on the opposite side so audiences could tell him apart from his father. Peter stayed in the role until 1932, when Lucene was fired by the studio. Peter later died of old age in 1946. Lucene's own end was violent too. In 1944, he was shot to death during a card game. By the time the full run of the series was over, as many as 10 different dogs had played Pete. That detail feels almost unreal, but it fits this whole story. Behind the laughter, behind the charm, behind the feeling of simple childhood fun, there was always another layer. There was money. There was pressure. There was loss. There were children carrying adult burdens, adults making decisions that scarred them, and careers that began in light but often ended in shadow. That is part of what makes the story of our gang so haunting. On screen, it was full of noise, joy, mischief, and kids who looked as if they belonged to a world untouched by real pain. But off-screen, the years told a different story. Some of them fought addiction. Some were used. Some were forgotten. Some made it through, but even they carried the marks. And somehow that is what makes those old films feel even stranger now. They still make people laugh. They still feel alive. But once you know what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, it becomes impossible to watch them in quite the same way again.